Welcome everybody. We're going to start at 4 o'clock sharp. So just give it 2 minutes and then we will begin. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, feel free to type it in the comments, in the YouTube comments, and we will answer them at the end of the session. So you're aware, today's webinar is all about the different curriculums available in South Africa that you can choose from. So it's quite an exciting but also very important webinar, because that's something that you need to make a decision on. And once you've made it, it's not so easy to switch, because you're already invested in that curriculum and the correct school that you've chosen. It's really important to give it a lot of thought as early as possible. Welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The topic today is which curriculum is best for you. So as a parent or as an educational provider, the best interest of each individual child should always be the #1 priority. No other factor should override this. And with so many educational options available for children today, there's absolutely no reason why you need to force all children into the same educational system. For each and every different learning style, there are so many different learning options and systems available to suit these different needs. My name is Sean Swartz. I'm the CEO of SK Education Solutions. We are the official office of the GED in South Africa and the rest of Africa. We are live on YouTube. We're streaming live, and we have made the comments facility available for you to post your questions. So please feel free to type your questions in the comments facility. We will be monitoring these questions, and we'll try our best to ensure we answer all your questions at the end of our presentation. Now, before you make a mistake and choose the wrong plan of action, which could cost you thousands and thousands of rands and so much stress and emotional turmoil, let's find out about all the options that you can choose from. Investigating options now could prevent costly and stressful mistakes. So, especially if you have to change a curriculum at a later stage, this is definitely something to consider. Our guest today is Lindsay Calder. She has worked in the education industry for more than 17 years with a very specialized focus on international qualifications. She has worked for Pearson, she's worked for the GED, as well as for City and Guilds, which are all international qualification awarding bodies. So we have the absolute perfect person to present to you the different curriculums and which one is best for your child. We are looking forward to learning all about the different curriculums, Lindsay. So thank you so much for making time available, and you may go ahead, share your screen, whatever you need to do. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sean, and Thank you to everyone for joining us. As Sean mentioned, there's a lot of curriculums available out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every curriculum is going to suit every student. Students often find that they fit better with one curriculum over another. Now, today, what we're really going to look at is the three main country curriculums, being the South African local or national curriculum, the various UK curriculums, and the American curriculum. Now, while there are many more curriculums out there, we're just going to focus on the most popular curriculums within South Africa. Now, whenever I am talking to a parent, the first thing I say to the parent is, what does your child want to do after school? Because it's always important to work backwards. So regardless of the age of your child, you want to know what their options are for post-schooling, whether they are more an academic child or a more creative child or a more vocational child. And what they want to do will dictate which curriculum they want to study. So let's look a bit closer about the various curriculums, as well as the pros and cons of each. Now, if we look at the South African curriculums, you essentially get the National Senior Certificate, the IEB, and Sakai. Now, while they're all very similar, there's slight differences between them. Traditionally, your more government schools use the National Senior Certificate, while your more private schools use the IEB, and your smaller providers, they use Sakai. Now, what is the national curriculum? Students progress from grade R through to grade 12, and they generally do 6 subjects plus life orientation. So it's 7 subjects. Now, students would choose subjects according to what they want to do post-school, as well as where their strengths are. So students normally would do 2 languages, as well as then 4 other subjects, and then we always add on life orientation. Now, with the South African curriculums, exams are available only at the end of the year, but students carry over some marks into their final exams. The difference here is that almost 60–70% of the grade 12 exam is made up of the grade 11 work. So it's very important that the students transition from grade 11 through to grade 12 is quite seamless, because you don't want to interrupt that learning. Now, the method of assessment is very much rote learning. So the students would go and learn concepts, and then they would apply those concepts within the exam. The downside of that is really your students then who are more out of the box thinking are very much forced into the box thinking. So it benefits a student who is good with memorizing. Now, because it's a South African national curriculum, obviously students, if they achieve the sufficient marks, can go and study further at South African universities, as well as many universities around the world. They could potentially have to do equivalence, or get a certificate of equivalence should they move to another country, because it's a local qualification. If a student fails their exams, they would need to, for matric, they have a rewrite option, a sub option in about March the next year, or they need to wait till the year after. So it does slow things down a bit for students, because they essentially delayed a year. But being the national exam, students there's multiple testing venues if they are not a mainstream student. So if you're a homeschooling student, you can go and write as an external student at any of the schools. You would just register as an external student. So you have some level of flexibility there. And the results are normally, they come out in the January. So if we look, I just want to check if I've covered everything. So that is the South African curriculum. If you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments facility on YouTube. because now we're going to move on to the British curriculum options. Now, when we're looking at the British curriculum options, there's essentially two main curriculums. There's the Cambridge International Exams, and there's the Pearson International, or the edXL. Both of them do the IGCSE, AS, and A-level, and I'll explain those now. So with the British curriculums, it's very, particularly the Cambridge brand is very well known internationally. The Pearson edXL brand is not as well known, but the curriculums make use of a very similar style of learning, in that students are required to use critical thinking skills and application skills. Why that's nice is that, unlike the South African curriculum, students are not just tested on their memorizing skills. They need to understand the concepts and then take those concepts and apply them within the exam situation. Now, the level and academic standard of both of these curriculums is extremely high. So what a student can do is, for the equivalent of grades 8 and 9, they can do something called checkpoint exams. It looks at the three main subjects, being maths, English, and science, and they can write the exams in those. From there, as well as they can do local subjects to just top up their knowledge. From there, a student would progress onto the IGCSE level. The I is the international version of the GCSEs in the UK. The IGCSEs are equivalent to grade 10 and 11 in South Africa. And from there, a student would progress onto AS level, which is equivalent to grade 12, and A level, which is equivalent to first year university. Now, should a student want to go to university in the UK, they would need to go up to A level. For South African regulations, they can just go up to AS level. So with the British curriculum, you're looking at a student that is more academic, because the workload is large and the level is high. Now, a student can go and apply for foreign or for exemption with either of these curriculums, and they can apply for complete exemption or for conditional exemption, and we'll explain those in a little bit. Now, the difference is when you're looking at going to university, and if you're trying to compare the British curriculums to the South African, in terms of your university admission M score, for your grades, you would get similar between the two. But something to bear in mind is with the level of the British curriculums versus the level of the South African curriculums, it would be more workload and more academic if you went through on the British curriculum side versus the South African for the same amount of university admission scores. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. Now, what is nice though, is that the Cambridge exams are offered twice a year versus only once a year with the South African. So in May, June, and October, November, there's exam sittings. But what you do need to pay attention to when you are doing the British curriculums, if you want to go to university in South Africa, and this is for South African universities, you need to make sure that you comply with the exemption requirements. Now, USAF, which is University of South Africa, the exemption requirements are very clearly laid out, but they are very strict. You need to make sure you have your right subjects according to the groups. You have your right number of exam sittings, because when you apply with a combination of your IGCSE, which is your grades 10 and 11 combined, and your AS level, which is your grade 12. And those subjects that you're going to be submitting to USAF for exemption need to be completed in a maximum of 2 exam sittings. But 2 exam sessions done in the same year are counted as 1. So it's always important to work backwards, because what you would do is you would look at doing between 5 to 6 IGCSE subjects. And remember, if you want complete exemption, you need to have 2 languages. If you only have 1 language, you would only have the option of conditional exemption, which then does not guarantee university admission as much. And then you would have 4 to 5 AS levels. So you would complete your IGCSEs, and then those you would progress onto AS level, because the knowledge acquired in the IGCSE carries over into the next level of knowledge that you acquire in the AS level. So you would do your combination of IGCSEs and AS levels, and those you would submit within the correct subject groupings, within the correct number of exam sittings. The nice thing with the British curriculum is that with your exams twice a year, you can, if you want, structure your exam sittings slightly. Be it you do your IGCSEs all in one, and then you split your AS over 2 within the same year, or you do them all. You've got to work out your exam sittings. That is very, very important. Now, universities around the world accept Cambridge and Edexcel, they know them. But I know from experience, if you're looking at going to an American university, they don't give as high points for Cambridge when you compare it to the level that you're studying. So you sometimes are disadvantaged if you're going for an American university with the Cambridge exams, because just in terms of the number of points you acquire. So it's just something to think about. And I know when you're young, it is so hard to know what you want to do after school, but it's always important to keep as many options open as possible. And also look at what type of student you are. If you are not an academic student, don't think about doing your AS levels and your IGCSEs. It is a huge amount of work. It is a huge amount of pressure, and it is very structured. It's going to destroy you, rather than look at an alternative option. So that's British curriculum. Now let's look at the American curriculum. So within South Africa, as well as wider Africa, the GED is the preferred American option. Now, what is different is, while the GED is very similar to the British curriculum in that it uses critical thinking skills and argumentative writing and application of knowledge. So a student learns the knowledge, and they just need to be able to apply that knowledge within the test environment. A student is not therefore required to just parrot learn or rote learn. So it really tests your application skills versus your memory skills. Now, why some students prefer the GED over the other curriculums is that it's a lot more flexible. While there is 8 subjects, those 8 subjects are tested across 4 tests. And those tests can be done at any time of the year. So the flexibility comes in that a student can study one subject at a time, or study for one test at a time, write that test, and then move on to study the content for the next test. Another thing that contributes to its flexibility is that if a student fails, they can rebook and write straight away or the next day within 2 weeks, so that they're not waiting 6 months to a year to rewrite. Now, with the GED, students find it's a lot less stressful because they can study less subjects at a time and test on that specific subject that they've studied and then move on to the next one. With the GED, it has its international recognition like the other curriculums, but in terms of South African government universities, they don't accept the GED. So if you have a student who's looking to study engineering or medicine or veterinary science, then I would recommend you look more at the Cambridge or the South African curriculums, because it's also known. So it goes with the specific subject you choose, let's say biology, it goes more in depth as opposed to a more broader context. So it's important to know if you are going to be more a medical student or if you want to study graphic design. because that will depend on which curriculum you choose. Now, if we look at the types of exemption in South Africa, because it can really get quite confusing, and these are issued by USAF, being University South Africa. So what you would do is you would finish your curriculum, and whether you are studying any foreign curriculum, be it Cambridge, Pearson, GED, any of those, you would need to apply to University South Africa for your exemption certificate, and dependent on which exemption. So a complete exemption is that you meet all the exemption requirements. So if I take, for example, Cambridge or EdXL, you have all your groupings correct, you have your 2 languages, and you have your exam settings correct. You can then apply for complete exemption. Complete exemption is the same in the South African side as a bachelor's pass. It means you have met the requirements and you can apply to university with your complete exemption. Your conditional exemption certificates, there's 4 options, of which mature age means that you're over the age of 23 and now you want to go and study at university. They will look at that, and provided you meet the requirements, they will give a mature age exemption that you can then submit to the university. The foreign conditional exemption, that is for a student, let's say a Cambridge student, who has not completed 2 languages. So they've done another subject in place of a second language, so they would qualify for foreign conditional exemption. In the old days, a GED used to also be able to apply for foreign conditional exemption, but USAF's changed that rule, and that is why we now say that GED students are not able to go directly into degree programs at universities. They would need to look at a higher certificate or a private institution such as Boston City Campus or the International American Accredited University of the People to apply for a degree program. You also then get your ordinary conditional, which means you get it for a year, and every year it's renewed to make sure gives you a chance to meet the requirements, as well as your Senate's discretionary, which means that your admission is up to the discretion of the university. Now, these exemptions all come down to which curriculum you do. Remember, if you do the South African curriculum, you don't need to apply to USAF. It would automatically be given. Now, university admission and NBTS. As we mentioned, university admissions, they've got certain requirements, they've got M scores, and you need to meet those scores. So if we take, for an example, if you complete the South African curriculums, you either would get your National Senior Certificate, or you'd get your National Senior Certificate with a bachelor's pass, meaning you can apply to university. If you do Cambridge and you get your Cambridge, you meet the requirements, you get your complete exemption, you can then also apply, and they will look at your marks, and your marks will equate to scores, and every qualification has a minimum admission score. Now, a lot of tertiary institutions, regardless of which curriculum you study, as well as what grades you get, whether you get 6 distinctions or no distinctions, a lot of tertiary institutions are now insisting that students complete the national benchmark test for their admission purposes. So for some institutions, it's become a mandatory admission requirement that a student, in addition to completing their grade 12 or grade 12 equivalent, they also need to complete their national benchmark tests. Now, the national benchmark tests, it's a national test. It runs from, I think it's from May to February of every year. There's about 1 test a week in each of those months. And what it covers is the English and maths. And a student who's completed grade 12, or a student who is completing grade 12, technically should be able to pass the NBTS. But obviously, like any student, you want to prepare. The NBTS don't have a lot of support material available out there, as well as past papers and practice tests. And what they really do is the questions are quite different in terms of they're very application-based. So it's important to make sure that you are fully prepared when you're writing the NBTs. Learn a lot. They offer an online course for the maths, the MAT, NBTs, where students can practice those multiple choice skills needed in analyzing a maths equation and applying that, and then identifying the relevant multiple choice answer. So that's something to go and look into, because you don't want to just go rock up and write your exam when your future is dependent on the results you get. So it's always something to pay attention to. So that is our very brief overview of the 3 different country curriculums. We've looked at the main curriculums. There are obviously many more curriculums out there. We're going to look at questions now. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments facility on YouTube, and we'll definitely go through and answer them. Thanks.
Thanks, Lindsay. Well, I think that was a huge amount of information to absorb in 25 minutes. This webinar is being recorded, and so the link will be made available to everybody. You can always go back and jump straight to the part that you want to rewatch, so that you can ensure that you've understood everything that Lindsay has said. We've got a whole bunch of questions that have come in both on email and on YouTube. So I'm just going to go through the email ones first, and then I'll jump through to the YouTube ones. So the first question was relating to the GED and acceptance to university. Now, I know you spoke about that, but maybe you can just speak about it a little bit in more detail, like what do you do, and I'll just break it down. Public universities, private universities, and international universities. What are the options?
Okay. So I think let's work backwards. Let's start with international. So international universities, particularly American universities, about 98% of American universities and colleges accept the GED straight into degree programs. So all you need is your GED, and to pass your GED, and you can apply to an American or many international universities. I know, for example, New Zealand and Australia universities want the GED together with your SAT tests, and then they will accept you. We're going to then also separate private and government universities. Private universities or private tertiary institutions, they can accept students at their own discretion, provided they can justify that the student will meet the requirements within a framework. So, for example, Boston City campus, they will accept GED students provided they've met their required marks for many of their degree programs except accounting. For the students that they don't accept straight into the degree program, you can go and do a higher certificate at NQF level 5. So if you think grade 12 is NQF level 4, a higher certificate is NQF level 5, and then you can apply for a degree at NQF level 6. So if you think of the levels, it's almost like steps up. So for private institutions, you can either go do a higher certificate or your degree. Government universities, most of them don't accept GED students straight into degree programs. So you would need to look at doing a higher certificate first before applying for a degree at a government university. Oops, Sean, you muted.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks so much for that. I think just to clarify regarding international universities, some universities overseas, especially the American ones, will accept you directly with the GED, but others will require you to also do your SATs, which is actually very similar to what you spoke about in your presentation, which is the local equivalent in South Africa called the NBTS. One university that we highly recommend, firstly, it's a really good university. It's highly accredited in America, and it's actually relatively cheap compared to any other American university or any other South African university, and that is the University of the People. And I'm going to be typing in the link, and I'll be sending the link in the comments. So it's really important to know that there are options available to study. As you said, private universities will accept you directly, such as Boston. You can do a degree directly with them. In public universities, not as easy, but there are options available. Another question that came through when you were talking about the NBTs was, can you just talk about more about the NBTs? How many tests are there? And you did mention about preparation. I would just like to add on the preparation side, as you mentioned, Learn a Lot to offer a maths preparation course. It was actually developed by a professor of mathematics. His name is Professor Glenn Cross. And it's an amazing course because it assumes you already know the South African maths curriculum, which you have to know in order to write the NBTs. But very, very, very different to the way you write the final matric exams is the way that the NBTs are testing you. It's very different. Firstly, it's all multiple choice. And you've got to apply and you've got to think. You can't just remember, oh, this is how I do something and quickly just work it out. You've got to think. And so a large part of the course actually spends teaching you how to think, and specifically skills on answering multiple choice questions. So it's a really great course. Lindsay, while you're explaining the other exams that are needed in the NBTs, I will put a link to that course in the chat facility, and then we are going to jump straight into the questions that are in YouTube.
Perfect, thanks. So yeah, so very much like you said, is that the NBTs, it's a test used for first-year applicants, and you can't assume because you're studying grade 12 that you're just automatically going to pass the NBTs, because it's really designed to measure a writer's ability to transfer the understanding. So you have your language skills test and you have your numerical skills test. So you have two tests, and it's made up of two tests, and you can view the tests as almost independent tests because they're not linked. So it's very important to be able to answer non-routine problems in the multiple choice format. So you're not going to be thrown knowledge that you don't cover, but it's very different to be able to answer the questions in that non-routine problem-solving way, particularly if you're studying the National Senior Certificate. So the tests are written between May of one year and February of the next year. And there's a mixture of, you can choose whether you write the online test or a paper test. They're not expensive, the tests. They're about 250 Rand per test. And you can book and go and write at multiple testing venues. I think the biggest thing really is that the university would then look at your NBT score together with your grade 12 results, and on that make a decision. Because I think with a lot of the media around the level of the National Senior Certificate in South Africa, the grades students are getting, universities are wanting a benchmark test for any student, regardless of what curriculum they write for grade 12 or equivalent and where they write it. It just sets a bar for all students. And so it also creates equal opportunities then for all students, because everyone would then write the same test.
Yeah, I think it's really important to mention one last point on the NBTs, and that is, as an example, if you want to go and study medicine, so obviously you're not going to do the GED if you want to study medicine, but if you've done Cambridge or you've done the South African curriculum and you want to study medicine, when you're ready to apply to university, your matric marks only count 50% towards your acceptance. And the NBT scores that you get count the other 50%. And that is how important the NBTs are. So just something to take into account.
And I think with so many people needing to write the NBTs now, is it's not a test you want to write over and over and over again, is because bookings are limited. There's essentially one test a weekend during those months, and bookings are limited. So you need to ensure that when you go and write the test, you write it once, you get a good score the first time, and then you're done.
So Lindsay, here's a question for you. If I haven't done or haven't been to high school since I got my grade 8, can I still do my GED?
So it would really depend on, so firstly, the GED minimum testing age is 17. I would highly recommend, instead of going straight into the GED, looking at possibly first doing a pre-GED bridging course to get, which starts you on basic level, builds you up to the level you need to be, and from there you can progress onto the GED. I don't think I would go straight into the GED. I would definitely first do the pre-GED bridging course.
Okay. So I guess it's really just getting you up to speed so that you can start the GED, but it's not stopping you. If you want to do it, you can. As long as you're 17 when you're ready to write the exams, you're good to go.
Yeah, we also
highly recommended that you make sure you're up to speed, because the GED is not easy. You've still got to pass it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. We're not saying that anyone who's never been to high school can suddenly go pass a GED. We're saying we recommend doing a pre-GED first, because you're going to struggle in the GED otherwise. You need to get those fundamental key skills in place before you can progress on.
Okay. This question, it's not very specific, but from the question, I'm assuming it's talking about Cambridge or the UK option. And the question is it any 2 languages, or are there specifics that you need to do? Must you have a South African language or a language related to the country you're applying to? So I'm assuming towards university.
Correct. So obviously, in terms of if you're wanting to go to university in South Africa, you're going to ideally want to do English first language. And then in terms of your second language, Cambridge does Afrikaans. You can do Arabic, Chinese, Czech, Dutch, French, German, Greek, Hindi, Zulu. The list goes on. Swahili, Setswana, Spanish. There's a whole bunch of subjects that you can do in terms of second languages. You do want your English first language, though, because the universities are going to want that.
So your second language doesn't need to be one of the official South African languages?
No, it can be Spanish, French, German, any of those.
Great. That clarifies that. Then Lizelle was asking, what about the American High School Diploma?
Okay, so the American High School Diploma is another option. Just why I didn't cover it is it's not as popular in South Africa as a GED, but it would be similar to the GED in terms of your recognition. It would be important to always then just look at if exemption is available, you would look on the USAF's website under their exemption requirements. But I would first check with the institution where you want to study as well as USAF. But yes, it is another curriculum that's covered.
Okay. Then I'm going to combine 2 questions together. They both relate to the GED. The first thing is, how does the GED work in Namibia? And the second part to that is, can you be accepted into universities in Namibia with the GED?
Okay, perfect. Great question. And why we haven't covered Namibia in as much detail is purely because we have more numbers of GED of students in South Africa. So Namibia, they write the same GED, because everywhere in the world they write the same GED test. There's a GED testing center in Windhoek in Namibia, like a student would do in South Africa. So I know I've spoken a lot about exemption and USAF. In South Africa, the South African Qualifications Authority you can apply to them for a certificate of evaluation, which would equate to your GED to an NQF level 4. Now in Namibia, the Namibian Qualifications Authority would do the same. And if you're looking at studying at university in Namibia, you usually need to submit your GED to the NQA for a certificate of evaluation. Many institutions in Namibia do accept the GED, but as we say for anywhere, if you're looking at your engineering, your medicine, possibly consider other curriculums, because they're not going to accept you for those qualifications with the GED.
Thank you. Then the next question, actually also GED related. Help us with some universities that accept the GED. So I'll just answer that one quickly. Overseas, there's many, and we highly recommend the University of the People. It's uopeople.edu. That's the website. It's a great university. Go check it out.
And I think, Sean, I just want to add, although we recommend University of the People, we're completely independent. We recommend them because we've identified them, spoken to them, and we know them. There's no commission or anything that we get for recommending them. It's purely, we feel that they're a good, credible institution.
Absolutely, 100%. In South Africa, if you want to study a degree directly, immediately after getting your GED, you can go to Boston City campus. They've got a whole bunch of different degrees that you can study. If you want to study, for example, early childhood development teaching, you can go to, I think it's Varsity College as an example. You would have to do a higher certificate first. Once you've done your higher certificate, then you can move on to apply for an undergrad degree. And again, as we've mentioned, unfortunately, public universities are much harder to get into with a GED. The next question is, I don't understand the next question. It says, what if I never get my high school diploma? Well, if you've never received your high school diploma, then you can get one. You can get, for example, a GED. But if you are, as Lindsay mentioned, if you are over the age of 23, you could even apply directly to university with an exemption, the mature age exemption. That's also another option. How much does it cost to study at a community college in America? Well, Lindsay, I don't know if you want to answer that, or if you even know how to answer it.
Yeah, so actually we've run a webinar with, I think it was 3 or 4 community colleges in America. The best I'd recommend then, and they did talk about costs, is to go onto the ged.org.za website, under resources, under webinars. You'll find the webinar recording there, and you can go and watch that.
Perfect. So there we go. That's that. Next question was, where and how do you do the SATs? What are they made up of, and what are the costs involved?
So the best would be really is to Google the SATs. You can do them at Pearson VUE testing centers. So not all your Boston testing centers, but Pearson VUE testing centers. Like in Joburg, I know there's one in Sandton. But the best would be really is to Google SAT tests, and then you'll get all the information related to them.
Okay. And then do South African universities accept the American high school diploma?
I actually don't know off the top of my head. The best would be to check with USAF if you get any form of exemption. If you don't get any form of exemption, then the answer would be no.
Yeah, so go speak to USAF, they'll be able to tell you the answer. You've mentioned the pre-GED bridging course. And so the question is, where can one get more information on this course? I'm just going to say, I think the simplest answer is if you email us on info@ged.org.za. The email is info@ged.org.za. Email us your question. We'll be happy to refer you to one of our authorized education resellers that can provide you with authorized content. Okay, here we go. Lindsay, another GD one. Seems that GD is very popular today. Can a 14-year-old start with the pre-GED course?
So I would almost say 14 is a little bit young. And why I say that is, as I've always said, you need to work backwards. So you can only test when you're 17. So you could potentially look at studying the GD when you're 16. So then possibly when you're 15, you can start your pre-GD bridging course. So 14 potentially is a little bit young.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, you don't want to push them at that age. I mean, I guess you could do the pre-GD course, but also add on other subjects so that you're actually giving them a bit of a broader education at that age before they start focusing on an exit level certificate such as the GED. Lindsay, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this one or not, but what are the age limitations to the final year exams for each of the options that you've spoken about?
So, okay, so GD, there's no maximum age. We've had some 50, 60-year-olds write it and pass. That's amazing. Cambridge also, there is no, Cambridge and Pearson, there's no, there's no maximum age limit. You can also write that whenever. The South African system, I'm not 100% sure on that one. I'm assuming, because if you don't do the NSC, it's like an adult matric, a national adult matric that you could do, so you would probably do that option.
Yeah, correct. So I guess you should just verify with the examining body that you want to select. Now, in America, there are AP exams or advanced placement exams. Are you able to talk about that at all?
Not really.
Okay. All right. I think just one thing just to bear in mind regarding America, and that is the university system in America works a little bit different to here. And so you're able to write exams such as AP exams and get credit for those exams towards your degree in America. And the GED, because it's American, also have that ability. So that means that if you do very, very well in your GED exams, by the time you apply for university, you will already have a certain amount of credits towards your American degree. So, which is an amazing thing. So it's always worth trying to do your best in these exams and not just aiming to pass. So just following on to the 14-year-old, what advice could you give for if the plan was to do the GED eventually, but for now, what would you advise?
So it would also depend on whether, I'm assuming that the student is a homeschooling student. There's a lot of curriculums out there that the student can do, which covers your basic English, maths, science, those kind of skills. Is I would look at one of those providers, be it...
You can even recommend one. Maybe in the email, when they email us, they can ask that question and then you can recommend one of those providers.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of providers, and obviously there's some we recommend, but I wouldn't not do something. I would get the child to be studying, because as soon as you stop the brain studying, it forgets how to study. So you want to keep the child studying and preparing, and then move on to the pre-GD and then the GD.
I just want to say something regarding the GD quickly versus the other two providers or curriculums that we've spoken about today. And that is the fact that you can write exams every single day. And why is that important? Because from a stress perspective and from a pressure perspective, a lot of the GED students actually study one subject at a time, and then they go and write their exam, they do nicely, they pass, and then they move on to the next subject. Whereas the other curriculums, you have to. You don't have a choice. You have to study for all of the subjects at the same time and write in a very pressurized environment. And that leads on to my next question, and that is, how long does it take to complete the GED?
So typically students take between 9 and 12 months to complete the GED. That would be your typical student.
Okay, and for students that are really pushing and wanting to do it quickly, they can do it literally as quickly as they want, because exams are available every single day.
Yeah, it gives you the flexibility. And also what's nice with the GED is that it offers testing accommodation. So a lot of, generally, I mean, all the curriculums do offer testing accommodations, but where the GED is nice is that students can do that one subject at a time. They can study it over 2 or 3 years if they need to. There's no set time frame. There's no number of tests, number of exam sittings. And there is that option of applying for a testing accommodation, be it extra time, a reader or a scribe, so that it takes the pressure off the student in terms of they can focus on that one subject, perfect the skills in that subject, pass that subject, and then move on to the next. Another reason is, if I take, for example, English, the focus in English or reasoning through language arts is very much on argumentative writing skills. So if you write a word that is legible, that is readable, but it's not 100% spelled correctly, you're not going to be penalized for that, because the focus is not on that. The focus is on the skills acquired.
Yeah, correct. So essentially, if you think that you're going to learn off by heart and pass the GED exams, you're very wrong. You have to learn how to think. It's all about critical thinking skills, and obviously the school or the training provider that you select to help prepare you for the GED also prepare you from a critical thinking perspective.
And
so just as a reminder.
Yeah, I think that's where some students get it wrong. I actually was speaking to a student the other day, and they said to me, oh, but I've got all these textbooks and resources and I'm just trying to memorize them to go right. That student's not going to pass, because they should take the knowledge they acquire through identified resources, learn that, but learn the application of it. If you just have 4 textbooks and you think you're going to parrot learn those textbooks and go and write and pass and do well, you're wrong. You need to have those skills and the knowledge base.
And that, in fact, the other curriculums are also moving in that direction already. So like the IB exams, that's also become a lot more critical thinking based. You can't only learn off the heart. There is a lot of application as well. So in general, that's how the world is going. And so you need to accept that, and you can't just learn off the heart. So I see we're getting to the end of our hour. So I just want to remind everybody, please, if you have any private questions that you want to ask, email us on info@ged.org.za. We will be sending out an email to everyone that did register for this webinar with the recording of the webinar, together with all the links that we provided during the webinar for the NBTS and the pre-GED and everything else. So we will provide all that information, so don't worry, you will get it in the next day or two. And thank you, Lindsay, for your time and expertise in providing all this information for this webinar. And thank you to all our viewers that watched live, and I hope it was beneficial for you. Hope we managed to answer all your questions that you had, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Okay.